Nicholas, so great to be here with you. You're a PhD student at Boston College. We met in the New Economy Coalition almost 7 years ago now. You're studying different parts of the church, and you were just tying some really helpful threads together for me of some of the history of the Catholic Campaign Human Development, Specialized Catholic Action, young adults organizing together. And I think in this economy of Francesco, we're seeking to understand what is our place, especially here in the US with parishes, with diocesan leadership, with our own kind of Catholic cultural stuff that's in the air with a Catholic president today. You've been doing a lot of interesting thinking at the intersection of politics, community organizing, our church. Could you just orient me to some of the questions you're asking right now, both in your dissertation and then at the intersection of Harvard Kennedy School, a Fratelli Tutti School in Argentina, and where the church is at today and the opportunity you see for us?
Yeah, there's a lot there, Felipe. Thanks so much for inviting me to talk with you today. I think the big question I'm thinking about at the moment and have been for a while is what kind of institutional vehicles can drive change forward within the church and can help the church drive change forward within the world. And I see those two things as really interconnected, right? And one of the things I do as a theologian is look at the history of the Catholic Church, especially in the 19th and 20th centuries. And I've been very fascinated by this question of where in the past has progressive change, and I would say theologically the wind of the Spirit in the church come from? Where's it blown, you know? And one of the things that most struck me in the last couple of years is at previous moments in the life of the Catholic Church, it's often not come from parishes per se. And yet for many of us Catholics, this is certainly true of myself, we don't really have other institutional vehicles for participating in the life of the church. So much of our participation in the church happens through the parish. And yet in the past, certainly in European social Catholicism, but also in the United States, in Latin America to a lesser degree, there was a whole array of Catholic institutions and organizations which expressed what it meant to be Catholic, right? And which were often the vehicles for driving that kind of intra-church and intra-world transformation that I was talking about earlier. So my big question is, what kind of vehicles like that are needed today?
And you were just, like that. Yeah, and you were orienting me to two gatherings. One just happened on April 15th by a British theologian, Center for Angus. Tell us about that gathering, and Austin Ivory and some of the interconnection of why that space was exciting to you, and then move to the CCHD Catholic Gathering US that kind of happened a month later.
Yeah, so for me, in kind of this surreal way, in April and May of this year, I attended two gatherings within the span of a month that were the first time I really felt like I was a part of something larger, a movement within the church. And the first of those gatherings was a gathering on April 15th, convened by the Center for Theology and Community in the UK, run by the Reverend Dr. Angus Ritchie, who's an Anglican priest, but an Anglo-Catholic priest, very much working within the broader Catholic tradition, and co-organized with Austin Ivory, who many people may know as Pope Francis's leading biographer in English, and somebody who knows Francis fairly well personally. Austin had worked with Francis to create this beautiful book, Let Us Dream, that's Francis's really powerful expression of his political vision and the spirituality undergirding it. And so the gathering was called Let Us Dream. And it was a gathering for Catholics involved in community organizing around Europe and the US. You and I have both been involved in community organizing for a number of years, both through the IAF, and there were a lot, the Industrial Areas Foundation. There were a lot of people from the IAF from all over the country, from the UK, from Germany, from Italy, but also from other major faith-based organizing networks there, all brought together because we look at our organizing work not just as kind of a political thing we do on the side, but as a central expression of how we live out a life faithful to the gospel, you know. And what was really powerful about the game was it was my first time being in a space with a bunch of Catholics. There were a couple hundred of us from, you know, across the world, who are all involved in community organizing and all understood it in that way, not confined to any one organizing network or to any particular diocese or any particular demographic. It was a pretty diverse gathering, race and class-wise. It was really powerful. You know, as I was just telling you a little while ago, I've gone to various organizing gatherings in my life. I've gone to some Catholic gatherings. When I used to be in the Episcopal Church, I certainly went to a number of large Episcopalian gatherings, but I'd never been in a place where like my Catholic world and my organizing world intersected so completely, and where the relationship between them was seen as really, you know, they were two sides of the same coin. And it was really cool. Francis himself, Pope Francis, opened the gathering and welcomed all of us and said, essentially, what you are doing in community organizing is putting into practice the vision I've articulated in Fratelli Tutti and in Let Us Dream. And that was a really powerful thing to hear directly from the Pope, I think, to all of us. But in a way, maybe even still more powerful moment for me was when I was in a small group with a group of maybe 6 or 7, and there was a woman maybe in her 60s from the UK in that group who said, you know, this is the first time in decades I've felt like I did when I was part of the Young Christian Workers. And that made a light bulb go off, because I've been studying the Young Christian Workers as an academic. I have no personal experience with it. And I've really come to appreciate how for many decades, that organization and the larger world it represented, you could call it the Cardine movements, because all of them had their roots in the Belgian Cardinal Joseph Cardine, before he was a cardinal, when he was a priest. And they were one of the institutional backbones, that kind of change I was talking about, change in the church and change in the world. And they provided ordinary lay people, not priests or bishops, but lay people, with a network and a community that spanned classes, that spanned geography, and allowed them to connect to each other and feel like they were part of this larger movement that was driving change forward in the church and in the world. And so hearing her say that, it was really powerful. It was like, wow, this is the first time I've experienced something like that. And how do we create more of this? Because I bet a lot of people are hungry for it, especially younger people like me who don't have that background, you know, who don't have an experience with Young Christian Workers from 30, 40 years ago. So we go back to that big central question, right? what kind of institutions are needed to create that community?
I love this conversation, because I think so much about this moment for us as young people and as Catholics in America and in the world is like, how do we accompany and walk with each other, dreaming these big dreams, but with this kind of infrastructure you're talking about in the church that can hold our imaginations. And you and I were just lamenting that community organizing sends a focus on kind of a common good political questions and how to relate together as political people, and gives us a set of tools and practices. But on the economic side, we're also yearning for vehicles. And I think in sometimes this organizing context hasn't offered that. Now, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development has invested in economic development very strategically, a lot of their national strategic grants, and they're, you know, roughly 10 million a year. It's created a lot of good in this country. And can you tell us a little about that gathering, or a little about the seeds of hope? And I think that's part of what I see in the economy of Francesco, is that potential to create this infrastructure, or to try to come together and imagine what this infrastructure could look like, weaving together, whether it's, you know, Catholic charities or Catholic higher education, or religious orders, or fellow travelers. You know, tell us a little about the CCHD gathering and a little bit about where you see them, or what other potential partners could we be weaving together as this Francesco movement?
Absolutely, yeah. So CCHD, as some folks may know, celebrated its 50th anniversary this year. Technically that was last year, but because of COVID, we had it this year. And that gathering happened just about a month after the gathering I was just describing, after the Let Us Dream gathering, hosted virtually, both of them were. And I totally agree with you. Since it was created in the 1970s, CCHD, I think in the US, has been such an important force for good in the US Catholic Church. It was for many decades the single largest funder of community organizing, full stop, not just faith-based organizing within the country, secular or religious. It was actually created by a number of priests with connections to Saul Alinsky, which is one of the things I study as a theologian, to support that work. But it's also, as you said, been a funder for economic development work, for community development corporations, and for more experimental approaches to economic, what you would call economic systems change, right? And it was really cool at that gathering as well to again have that experience, the same experience I had a month before, of being in this larger community, in this kind of movement of people from across the country doing different kinds of work, many of them in community organizing, some of them in economic development, all with a common vision of the church that aligns very much with what Francis is now giving from the papacy, in his encyclicals and his speeches in books like Let Us Dream. And you presented there. I really enjoyed hearing more about the economy of Francesco there, and hearing more about what community organizing was being supported and what developments it was taking around the country. And it again made me conscious, like, here's another institution, CCHD, that's really creating that kind of space. And yet, how often does that kind of gathering actually happen? Like you and I were just talking about how it would be nice to see more local CCHD infrastructure, because they're organized around these local diocesan offices, and yet a lot of those offices in the last couple of decades have become inactive or under-resourced, and very few Catholics on the whole in the United States actually know about CCHD, except unfortunately for some of its critics. And yet I think particularly for younger Catholics, there's such a rich history there, and there's such a deep commitment to this vision of the church that many of us are connecting to through Francis, But again, like, how do we create more institutional vehicles for us to come together and discern together and live out our faith together, support each other in that, and also build power? Given our background in organizing, we're all about that, right? We got to build power to change whatever it is we want to change. And we need organization. We need institutions to do that. So how do we do it?
Yeah, Nicholas, something I appreciate so much, and this is my last question, is just around you're helping me and others uncover the history and the context around what the particular contribution of our Catholic tradition institution has been. And I think sometimes we can be timid in US context to embrace our Catholic faith publicly because of some of even our bishops, today. And so I'm curious, you help provide a more constructive vision for me, drawing back on, a couple of centuries back and even just the past 100 years. And then also this Fratelli Tutti school. And I think emerging institutions that are weaving together the academy with practical visionaries and change makers. Can you just offer us a few more threads? And I think as we look towards October 1st, gathering as North America, and then October 2nd, gathering as part of the global Francesco community. Could you just offer us maybe one or two little more vignettes on some of what we draw from our particular distinctive Catholic tradition and wisdom to offer the broader movement and questions we've been asking?
Oh yeah, sure. I'll try. Tall order. In the past, many of us in this space, we hear a lot about Catholic social teaching, and we strive to live that out, and that provides our vision, our ethical framework for thinking about the economy, for thinking about politics. Catholic social teaching didn't emerge from a vacuum. It didn't come from popes just deciding one day that this was what they should say. A lot of it came from more grassroots movements within the church, particularly among lay people, the Catholic workers who were organizing labor unions starting in the 1880s, 1890s. That's where Rerum Novarum came from, in part, our foundational document of Catholic social teaching. These Cardine movements I was talking about, like the Young Christian Workers or Young Christian Students, that started really in the 1900s, 1910s. Catholic political parties, like the People's Party in Italy or the Christian Democratic parties. My great-grandfather, who was from Costa Rica, was involved in the Republican Party in Costa Rica, which was inspired by Catholic social teaching and closely aligned with the Bishop of Alajuela, Victor Sanabria. That party helped build the Costa Rican social state in the 1940s. It's the reason why Costa Ricans have had healthcare and education and a welfare system in the last several decades. You know, Catholics did that as an expression of their faith, as they did in many countries. And so few of us, I think, especially in the US, really know that story, know that there was a thing called social Catholicism that wasn't just a set of ideas, it was a set of movements and leaders and institutions that were really driving change forward in the world. And that's where the ideas came from. They didn't come from on high. They weren't just abstract ideals. They came from the work of people in transforming the social world around them in all of these ways. And I think Francis comes from that world too, and is very much inviting us to dream about how we recreate that world today. You know, those institutions in many cases no longer exist, and in the form they took, they probably couldn't exist at least and have the same impact in our world. But when Francis is saying let us dream, I think he wants us to dream about, you know, how do we breathe new life, not just into the world, but into our church, and do that as two faces of the same process. There's a group of Argentines I've started to work with who are trying to create a Fratelli Tutti political school, to which you alluded, based on the principles of Francis's political vision as expressed in Fratelli Tutti, dedicated to forming a new generation of political leaders from around the world in that set of principles, and giving them the practical as well as the theoretical and spiritual tools they need to be agents of transformation and to be led by the principles of the Catholic faith in doing that. You know, and that's not something to keep secret. That's something we want to wear publicly. That's something I want to wear publicly. So I think it's a really fertile and exciting moment to gather together as Catholics and dream and think about how we do that. So I hope this set of conversations you're convening, which I'm so excited to learn more about, will keep that dreaming process going. So excited
Nicholas, thank you so much for anchoring us in some of our tradition and history, and for helping us imagine the contours of what's emerging all around us, and we can partake in and be protagonists of this transformation as Pope Francis invites us to. So thank you, and we can look forward to reading more of your work coming out next year, right? I know you're publishing a book next fall, so we'll all eagerly be looking for that to help ground us more in this tradition. Thank you so much, Nicholas.
Thank you, Felipe.